Giselle stumbled back home, enduring the normally 10-minute walk that took her 20 minutes. The villa was freezing cold as the heating was not turned on. The vast room was deathly quiet and chilly. Kicking off her high heels, Giselle stumbled into the bathroom like a drunkard. She turned on the hot water tap halfway and let it flow. From a moment ago, she was trying to hold on, but now she was lying in the bathtub like a dead person, the hot water spreading around her. The bright red long dress covered the entire bathtub like a glaring bloodstain, setting off Giselle's face as pale as white paper. She closed her eyes and sank her face into the water. The water gradually covered her head, cutting off all her senses. A brief suffocation numbed her heart. After a while, she couldn't help but open her mouth. And the hot water rushed in. A sense of nausea surged up from her stomach. Giselle opened her bloody red eyes and lifted her head from the water. She leaned over the bathtub, her body huddled, her stomach writhing as if a hand was pulling it. She numbly opened her mouth, her upper body convulsing uncontrollably. Everything she threw up after not eating for a day was a yellowish acidic liquid, burning her throat and making her tears fall. After throwing up, she rubbed her swollen eyes and looked at the bloody fluid on the floor. She smiled faintly. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. Her pupils were filled with lifelessness and desolation. She took off her red dress and wiped it on the bloodstain on the floor. She couldn't let Jensen see the blood. Outside, the sky gradually darkened. Giselle went back to her bedroom barefoot and fell onto the bed. She couldn't sleep. When she was sick, she could still fantasize about the promising future, but now, no matter how hard she tried, it was a futile struggle. For years, she had spent 4 years draining herself. From full of love to the bottomless despair now. On this day, she seemed to have shed all her tears for a lifetime. Giselle put her hand on her heart and said bitterly, "Clearly your stomach is the rotting part, why bother with the pain in your heart?" Suddenly, her phone vibrated in her bag. Reflexively, she propped herself up and quickly opened her bag to take out the phone. When she saw the caller ID on the screen, she seemed to have lost all her strength. "It's not him. What are you even hoping for?" she thought self-mockingly. Giselle stared blankly at her phone for 2 seconds, and finally, with stiff fingers, she slid up to answer the call. "Marcus." Giselle's voice was hoarse, as if a blade had just been sharpened on a whetstone, sounding a bit harsh. Marcus Thurman was her childhood friend who grew up with her. Although they were not relatives, they were closer than family. Giselle lived with the Thurman family for a long time when she was a child, and for her, Marcus was like a brother. On the phone, Marcus asked with concern, "Why is your voice so hoarse? Are you sick?" "I have a bit of a cold. Just woke up and my voice is hoarse." Giselle hadn't finished her sentence when Marcus interrupted her. "Giselle, are you lying to me now? Have you forgotten that I'm a doctor? I can tell the difference between a voice right after waking up or getting a cold and a voice after crying." Her throat tightened, as if a sharp stone was blocking it, making her mouth bleed but unable to speak a word of explanation. She could only smile bitterly in the end. Marcus asked, "Can you tell me why you were crying?" Giselle held the phone and stared at the wooden floor. Nobody likes to reveal their weaknesses, and she shook her head to refuse. "No." Marcus was taken aback. He knew what kind of person Giselle was. To put it nicely, she was strong-willed. But to put it bluntly, she was stubborn. If she didn't want to say something, even if you used a pair of pliers to force it out of her, she still wouldn't tell the truth. Marcus had to change the subject. "What were the results of your medical examination today?" Giselle pursed her lips and said, "It's fine." Marcus said, "If you don't want to tell me, then forget it. I have the right to see your medical report myself anyway." Marcus was a chief surgeon at that hospital, and it was an easy matter for him to check Giselle's medical report. She didn't realize that. You want me to check, or you tell me yourself, it's up to you, he continued to press her. For a moment, the phone went quiet, so quiet that she could hear the sound of his breathing through the speaker. Finally, Giselle gave in. It's cancer. Late-stage gastric cancer. Marcus was silent. He seemed to be holding something back, and his ragged breathing could be heard through the phone. How could this be? You're still so young. Marcus muttered, his voice gradually choked up. Even through the phone. Giselle could sense his sadness, that he was upset for her. It was enough for her that someone cared about her before she died. Come to the hospital, let me examine you again, Marcus offered. Giselle refused. No matter how many times I get checked, the result is always the same, Marcus. I know my own body. Maybe this is just karma. What are you talking about? Gigi, listen to me. Stay in the hospital and get treatment. You'll definitely get better. Marcus' voice was filled with sadness. He was an expert in this area of medicine and he knew how serious her illness was, and how painful it could be. How could Giselle let herself deteriorate like this? Marcus didn't know how to persuade her. Sometimes it wasn't that she didn't want to live, but whether fate allowed it. Her time was limited and the hospital's suggestions were either to stay in the hospital and suffer for a few more years or give up treatment and let fate decide for itself. Either way, she was dying soon. Gigi, you should divorce Jensen. Look at what he's done to you in these 4 years you've been together. Divorce. Giselle had never thought about divorcing Jensen. To her, he was everything, the light she had been trying to hold on to her entire life. But how could you hold on to light? Giselle squeezed her phone tightly, her knuckles turning white. It took a lot of effort to say, I'll consider it. Divorcing Jensen was like forcibly digging out a piece of flesh from her chest. How could it be so easy? Marcus urged her to visit the hospital again the next day. But Giselle didn't really take it to heart. Apart from being Jensen's wife, she was also the CEO of Sherwood Company and had various matters to attend to. After the call ended, Giselle threw her phone on the bedside table. Her stomach was still hurting. And it was probably going to be hard for her to fall asleep tonight. She opened a drawer and took out 2 bottles of pills, one for pain relief and one for sleep. After taking 2 pills from each bottle, she lay down on the bed. She didn't know if the medication was starting to work. But her brain started to feel muddled. She had frequent nightmares, and her chest felt heavy, unable to breathe and move, as if she were pressed down by a ghost. She shook her head and struggled until she woke up, suddenly realizing that the one pressing her down was not a ghost, but Jensen.